The streets of Harlem echoed with the rhythm of the 1930s, a cacophony of factory whistles, train tracks screeching, and by night, the soulful melodies of jazz spilling out of hidden clubs. Elijah Turner had grown up on these streets, where the city's noise had been both his constant companion and his greatest rival. Yet now those sounds were no longer an inspiration but a reminder of dreams deferred. That day, Elijah trudged home after a long shift at the textile factory. The rusty gates groaned as he left the industrial compound, his body weary, his spirit heavier. The cheerful banter of co-workers and the street vendors' cries blurred into the background. Pulling his fraying brown coat tighter around himself, Elijah walked as though the weight of the world sat squarely on his shoulders. The rain-soaked sidewalks shimmered under the flickering glow of streetlights, casting a dreamlike haze over Harlem's weathered buildings. Passing the corner music shop, Elijah's gaze lingered on the golden trumpet displayed in the window. As a child, he had stood here for hours, dreaming of playing that very trumpet on a stage. Now he simply glanced and moved on, his footsteps heavy with resignation. Dreams, he had learned, were a luxury. When he finally reached his cramped apartment, the peeling paint on the walls and the faint chill seeping through the windows greeted him like old, unwelcome friends. In the corner, an old radio quietly played a haunting jazz melody. Beside it, his own trumpet sat untouched, gathering a thin layer of dust. Elijah hesitated for a moment, reaching for it, but the weight of his responsibilities pulled him away. Sighing, he hung his coat and prepared for another monotonous day. The next morning, Elijah walked the familiar path to the factory, his steps as reluctant as the sunrise over Harlem. The neighborhood buzzed with life. Children chased each other near a bakery, entranced by the warm scent of fresh bread, while vendors prepared their stalls. Yet Elijah felt removed, disconnected. His gaze remained fixed on the pavement ahead. As he approached the station, the familiar strains of a saxophone drifted through the air. Old Mr. Tennyson, the street musician, was there as always, weaving melodies that told stories of Harlem's pain and resilience. Elijah stopped, captivated by the music, which seemed to resonate with the unspoken chapters of his own life. When Tennyson noticed him, he paused, lit a cigarette, and addressed him directly. "Heading to the factory again, aren't you?" Tennyson asked, exhaling smoke into the crisp morning air. Elijah nodded. "Yeah, I have to. I don't have a choice." Tennyson studied him with sharp eyes. "Dreams don't live in factories, Elijah. If you keep putting them off, they'll rot. Do you want to rot too?" The words struck Elijah like a thunderclap. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Elijah was back at the factory, his hands moving mechanically as he assembled parts on a roaring machine. Yet Tennyson's voice echoed in his mind. "Dreams don't live in factories." The monotonous hum of the machinery seemed to taunt him with its unrelenting rhythm, a stark reminder of his stagnant life. During his lunch break, Elijah spotted a poster on the factory wall. "Blue Note Talent Show, Saturday." The bold golden letters gleamed like the spotlight. He had always imagined himself standing under. For a fleeting moment, he saw himself on that stage, his trumpet filling the air with melodies that captured Harlem's soul. But the dream quickly evaporated as reality closed in. Saturday was a mandatory overtime shift. He stared at the poster, torn between obligation and aspiration. It wasn't just a decision about one evening. It was a choice that could reshape his life. The weight of responsibility bore down on him, but so did the pull of a dream that refused to die. That evening, Elijah returned home and hesitated in front of his trumpet. Its brass surface, dulled by time, felt cold under his fingertips. He lifted it with trembling hands, placed it to his lips, and played a single note. The sound was raw, echoing through the tiny room like a long-forgotten memory. Harlem seemed to respond, its distant hum synchronizing with the melody. Elijah played through the night, pouring years of suppressed dreams into every note. He thought of Harlem's streets, its rain-soaked corners, and the light that flickered through its darkness. But each pause between notes brought back the cold reality of his situation. His boss's warning rang in his ears. Skip the overtime and you're out. As dawn broke, Elijah stared at his trumpet, now lying silently on the table. He had made his decision. This time he wouldn't let his dream wait. Saturday evening arrived and Elijah stood outside Blue Note, his trumpet clutched tightly in his hand. The club pulsed with energy, its neon sign casting a warm glow on the cobblestones. He hesitated, his heart pounding. Failure would mean not just disappointment, but the loss of everything he had dared to hope for. Yet Tennyson's voice echoed in his mind. Dreams don't rot if you fight for them. He stepped inside. The club was alive with the haze of cigarette smoke, laughter and the hum of conversation. Photographs of jazz legends adorned the walls, and the stage seemed almost ethereal under the spotlight. Elijah joined the other contestants backstage, clutching his trumpet like a lifeline. As he waited, his nerves mounted. He heard the other performers, each note they played magnifying his self-doubt. But deep inside, a flicker of determination burned. "This is my chance," he whispered. "If not now, then never." When his name was called, Elijah felt his legs turn to lead. The room fell silent as he stepped into the light. The audience's expectant gazes bore into him, but he closed his eyes and lifted the trumpet to his lips. The first note hung in the air like a spark. Then came another and another until his melody filled the room.
Elijah played not just music, but a story
Story of Harlem's struggles and triumphs, of dreams crushed and reborn. The notes carried his soul, resonating with everyone in the room. When he finished, the silence was deafening. Then, like a wave, the applause erupted. Elijah stood frozen, tears welling in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt truly alive. As Elijah stepped off the stage, the thunderous applause still echoing in his ears, he felt an unfamiliar mix of elation and unease. The performance had been a triumph, but what came next? He had faced one challenge, but would he be ready for what awaited him beyond this moment? Finding a quiet corner in the bustling Blue Note, Elijah sat with his trumpet resting on his lap. The energy of the club swirled around him, but he felt as though he were in a bubble of silence. Another performer approached him, a saxophonist with a sly smile. "Good show," the man said, his tone teetering between admiration and condescension. "But the real test isn't one performance. It's proving you belong here night after night." Elijah forced a smile but felt his confidence waver. The man's words weren't meant to be cruel, yet they struck a chord. Could he truly sustain this success, or was he just another fleeting act? As he sat alone, the echoes of his father's voice resurfaced. "Dreams won't feed you, Elijah. Stick to what's safe." But then Tennyson's voice came to him like a distant melody. "Dreams only rot if you let them." Elijah gripped the trumpet tighter. He wasn't ready to let go, not yet. The next day, Elijah returned to Blue Note to learn the results of the competition. His name was at the top of the list. A wave of pride washed over him, but it was quickly replaced by the weight of expectation. The club manager approached him with a firm handshake. "Congratulations," he said. "You're performing at the Harlem Jazz Festival next week. It's the opportunity of a lifetime, but it's also a huge responsibility. If you fail, it won't just hurt you, it'll hurt the Blue Note's reputation." Elijah nodded, his chest tightening. This wasn't just about him anymore. The stakes were higher than ever. The days leading up to the festival were grueling. Elijah spent hours rehearsing, his fingers growing sore from relentless practice. But every time he picked up his trumpet, doubts crept in. What if he faltered on stage? What if he disappointed the people who believed in him? His fear of failure grew as the festival approached, threatening to drown out the music inside him. The night of the festival, Harlem was electric. People filled the streets, buzzing with excitement. As Elijah stood backstage, he could hear the murmurs of the crowd, the distant hum of anticipation. He felt the weight of his decision to pursue this dream, the sacrifices he'd made to be here. When his name was announced, Elijah stepped into the spotlight. The crowd was vast, their faces blurred under the intense lights. He closed his eyes, raised his trumpet, and played. The music that poured from him wasn't just notes, it was Harlem itself. It was the sweat and toil of the factory, the wisdom of the streets, the sting of his father's doubt, and the triumph of his own resilience. Each note soared, weaving a tapestry of the life he had lived and the life he dreamed of. When he finished, the crowd erupted in applause. People stood cheering and clapping. Elijah lowered his trumpet and gazed at the sea of faces. Tears streamed down his cheeks. This was his moment. He had faced his greatest trial and he had won. As the applause from the Harlem Jazz Festival filled the air, Elijah stepped off the stage, his chest heaving with emotion. For the first time in his life, he felt not just seen but understood. The crowd's cheers weren't just for the music but for the story he had told, a story that belonged not just to him, but to everyone in Harlem. Backstage, the festival director approached him, a broad smile on his face. "Elijah," he said, clapping him on the shoulder, "you've got something special. We want you back for a regular slot at the Blue Note. You'll be headlining." The words hit Elijah like a rush of warm air. Headlining at the Blue Note was a dream he hadn't even dared to articulate. But this victory wasn't just his, it was shared with Harlem, the streets that had shaped him, and the people who had inspired him. As he walked home that night, trumpet in hand, the familiar sights of Harlem looked different. The same streetlights flickered, the same music floated through the air, but everything felt more alive. Elijah realized he hadn't just won a spot at the Blue Note. He had reclaimed his dream. It was no longer deferred, no longer a distant possibility, it was his reality. The morning after the festival, Elijah found himself walking the streets of Harlem with a renewed sense of purpose. The same factory he once labored in now seemed a relic of a past life. Workers filed in, their faces tired and resigned, but Elijah knew his path was different now. He would no longer be a cog in someone else's machine. Elijah's fame quickly grew, and with it came responsibility. He began to see himself not just as a musician, but as a beacon of hope for others. The young people of Harlem looked up to him, seeing in his success the possibility of their own dreams. Determined to give back, Elijah started offering free music lessons at a local community center. Each evening, he would gather a group of eager students, teaching them not just how to play instruments, but how to find their voices. Music isn't just sound, he would tell them. It's your story. It's your heart. And no one can take that away from you. Elijah's efforts revitalized Harlem's jazz scene. The clubs buzzed with fresh talent, and his students began performing their own gigs. Harlem became not just a place of history, but a hub of rebirth, its streets echoing with the vibrant sound of dreams realized. Elijah's journey had started with a dream he thought he'd lost, buried under the weight of obligation and doubt. But through resilience, courage, and the unwavering rhythm of Harlem itself, he had not only reclaimed his dream, but helped others find theirs. He was no longer just a musician. He was a symbol of what was possible when you refused to let your dreams rot. Years later, when Elijah took the stage at another Harlem Jazz Festival, the crowd was filled with his students, friends, and neighbors. As he raised his trumpet, he smiled. This wasn't just his story anymore, it was Harlem's.
What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore, and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over, like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode